So the first thing we're going to need is a hoop. This is an 18 centimeter hoop, and this is going to work great for what we need today. The next thing we're going to need is a pen for us to trace the pattern on the fabric. So this one is heat erasable, which means any form of heat that comes close to my finished embroidery project is going to be completely wiped off. So this is what I use, but you can use any that works for you. Some on the market are water soluble, so you can wash your fabric after, but I just really don't like washing my fabric because I feel like all my knots and my stitches are going to come off. I have like a fear of that, so I personally use this. I have a little scissors that I love to use for thread, but you can use any kind of scissors that you have. When I was new and working on embroidery kits, I'm pretty sure I was using a kitchen scissors for like the longest time before I got these cute things, but these are not necessary, just good to have. I will say though that these cut very, very sharp for something as thin as a thread. So you get a really sharp, like I would just say like straight cut with these kinds of smaller scissors versus the kitchen scissors I was using. It was giving me very dull ends on the threads. The next thing we're going to need is some needles. I just happen to be using these from DMC. Again, there's nothing crazy special about these. I would say any small thin needle would work. It really also does depend on what kind of fabric you're using, because if you're using thinner fabric, which I would say the one I'm using is pretty thin, it's not too thick. So for something like this, I find this kind of, or this size needle sort of goes through very easily. And of course, there'd be no way to do any kind of embroidery project without some kind of fabric. I'm using Kona cotton. It personally works for me, and I really love using this kind of fabric. Some people don't like it because it's they say it's a little bit too thin for the kinds of projects that they're working on. If you're just starting out, don't worry too much about the fabric. And probably the last thing we're going to obviously need to do our embroidery project is whatever color of floss that we like. So these are just the colors I've chosen just for now. When I'm actually doing the actual project, I may even change my mind and use different colors, but use whatever color that you want depending on the embroidery project, the design, whatever you think matches, and use your own creativity, because I just picked these colors and you can pick totally different colors and the project can be completely different and still beautiful. So what you're going to do next is you're going to take your hoop, whatever size you have, you're going to lay it flat. At least this is how I do it. You're going to lay it flat on your fabric. So on this side, I want about this much fabric sticking out, just because it makes it easier for the fabric that you're going to put in between the hoops for it to actually stay put and not come loose. I feel like the more fabric, at least in my experience, the more fabric you have on the outside, it's easier to work on the fabric that you're working with on the inside. So you're going to use a bigger scissors meant for fabric. So this is very sharp and it does a fantastic job cutting my fabrics, literally like butter. So I'm just gonna choose how much fabric I want sticking out, and I'm going to start cutting. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and put our fabric through, and I know you haven't traced anything, but this little trick helps a lot. So here is something that I like to do. So I like to put the fabric in. So what we're going to do is we're going to trace using this right now, and I'll show you. So for the purpose of just showing you how to use this sort of method to trace your patterns, I've just pulled up a random pattern. This is not my pattern. We're just using it for the purpose of this video. So this is the front of your embroidery. You're gonna flip it and you're gonna put it just like that on the pattern. Okay, now this is also where having a little extra fabric might help because you can kind of just tuck it behind your device and you can start tracing with your pen. Now, another way to trace a pattern without using a tablet or some kind of an iPad is you're going to take your fabric out. So for this, you're going to be using something called a screen pad. I think that's what they're called. So you can turn the light on these quite high, as you can see, and you would print your digital pattern. You would place the paper on this, and then you would put your fabric on top of the paper. You might want to secure it with some needles that would go through your fabric into the paper underneath and then out again like this. Okay, so you're going to secure it like that so it doesn't move around. And you're going to take your pen and you're going to start tracing. As long as the actual fabric is not moving on the paper, so as long as that's not happening, you should be able to get a good pattern out of this method as well. I used to use this pretty much for the first almost, I don't know, 6-7 months of doing embroidery. I was doing it this way. And then just recently I got an iPad. So use what you have, get creative. You can even Google other ways to trace. Okay, so for this pattern that you've purchased and we're going to work on together, I've already went ahead and outlined everything, just traced it right from my iPad. And I'm going to use a black thread. Now, again, I want you guys to use this as an inspiration and create your own sort of creations and get more comfortable and flexible with yourself as you're stitching. But for reference, I've used one floss. But again, don't get caught up on the small details and try to have fun and just get to play around with the stitches and with the design and colors. I mean, you can do anything you want to and your project will still come out beautiful. So we're going to start outlining the outline of the envelope. I'm going to start with a back stitch. You're going to bring your needle to the front. I usually just make one stitch and then making sure that went through properly. And as there's light behind it, you can see, but if I just turn my light off right now, you can't really see much. So this is why I love this fabric. Yes, if you put it by a light, you can probably see all the back and all the stitches that you're doing, but no one's gonna really look at it like that. And also you're gonna put a felt or somehow close the back so light won't penetrate through that thick layer of probably felt that you'll use. So here's a back stitch. I feel like with back stitches, the smaller or shorter distance you do, so your stitches, the smaller that they are, or the shorter I should say that they are, you have better control of the direction that you're stitching. And this is going to make more sense as you stitch more. So of course I'm not sitting and I'm kind of just doing the stitches just for the purpose of showing it to you. Yours is probably going to be much more neater, even neater than this, because I have one eye on the camera and one eye on the hoop. And I'm trying to be as much as on the line of the line that I've traced. So as close to the line as possible, because it does show if you kind of deviate from a straight line. And I've noticed that on my designs, on my embroidery hoops, like many, many times. So you're just gonna continue to go all around. You're gonna do these lines. You're gonna do this one, and you're gonna do the top. And I'll show you what to do next. Okay, so after you've done all your back stitches and outlined the envelope, this or something like this is what you should be left with. Now I'm going to show you how to do something called a stem stitch. And with the stem stitch, you're going to use it for all of the stems of the flowers that you see. So everything, I'm kind of running my nails through right now, everything you see in this piece that has stem, we're going to use this exact same stitch for it. So let me show you. So I already have the thread that I'm using this sort of brightish green color. Hold it like this just because that's how I'm comfortable. I'm going to try to come as close as I can. Okay. So I'm going to start as close to the black line as I can. So this is how close I am. I'm going to pull your thread through. You're going to go about maybe just a millimeter in, but you're not going to go all the way through. Between the point that these two threads enter the fabric is where you're going to take your needle from behind and bring it through. So your needle's here. So I want to show you sort of like the distance. This is what we're looking at, and then you're going to pull through. Okay. Now again, for your second stitch, you're going to go another millimeter forward, put your needle through, bring it to the front, right about halfway between where this thread and this thread enter the fabric, like that. And then you slowly pull through. So this is what it should look like. I'm going to do one more. So again, we're going to go a millimeter forward, and then bring our needle back to the front about as middle of these three entry points as we can. And that's all it is. So you see this really pretty twist that's happening. It's what you're looking to achieve. Now go ahead and do this and maybe even all of my stems, and I'll be back to show you the next stitch. Okay, so here I have all of the stem stitches finished. You can choose the shades of green, or here I'm using some brown. You can choose how dark or how light you want them to be. I kind of tried to give a little bit of a contrast to the colors, and this kind of makes sense as to where I'm going with the little blossoms on each flower. So I want to start off, as I said, with this flower here. So we're going to start with the petals. The stitch we're going to learn to do on this flower is called the satin stitch. So you take your needle, you pull it through. You're going to make first a little line in the middle, identifying how long the stitch is going to be, and then you're going to again start from the bottom, the same thing, pull through, and you're going to try to outline the petals as best as you can. And you're going to do that until you fill the petal with the color of your thread. Just want to get really close. Sometimes I try to push the little thread just to kind of make it sit in a particular place. And I'm going to do one more on this side, like that. There we go. So we have our first petal, and this is the color I picked. You can pick whatever color you want, and do the same thing for all the petals using your satin stitch that you just learned with any color that you like. And I'm going to finish this flower and I'll show you what to do next. Okay, so this flower is done. So this is something like what yours might look like. Maybe it's a little bit different. It's okay. The only way you'd be doing this wrong is if you're not having fun. So I really hope you're enjoying it so far. I don't know how new you are to the world of embroidery, but if you're very new, I can remember the feeling I had right about, about the 20-30% mark completion of the project or the piece that I'm working on, and I'd start to see things like this and I'd be like, oh my god, it's really turning beautiful. So I hope that you're loving your piece so far as much as I am, and let's go ahead to the next stitch. So the next stitch we're going to do, since we just learned how to do a satin stitch, we're going to do the exact same stitch, the satin stitch, on all the leaves on this stem and this stem. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, now there's a few stitches that we can use to create leaves on any artwork, any embroidery work that we're doing. There is something called the satin stitch that we just learned, and we're going to do it again here. And there's also another kind of stitch that is really nicely used as a leaf called a fishbone stitch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually show you both. So on this one, we're going to start with the stem stitch, and then on the other ones, we'll try the fishbone stitch. For the satin stitch, we're going to start at the top, the sharp point, and go right down to where the stem ends. We're going to go a little lower and as close as possible, pull our needle through, and again down by the stem, stem. Okay. So as you can see, we're slowly giving the leaf some width, and we're developing its shape. So that, I would say, looks good for the one side. So now we're just going to go ahead on the other side and replicate that. So you want to start your next one where you started it on that side. So for me, it would be, I'm on the wrong side. So for me, it would be somewhere here. And same with the last one, it's lined with its opposite stitch on the other side. And there you go. So now we're going to go ahead and replicate that on all the leaves on this stem here, and we'll come back for the fishbone stitch. Okay, so here is the finished product of what the satin stitch would look like on the leaves of this little stem. So we're going to move on to these two, and these two are the ones that we're going to do as fishbone stitch. Well, because all these other leaves, they belong to the other stem. Start here, and we're going to go just until about, oh, you can't see me, and we're going to go just until about here, right in the middle. You're going to poke your thread in, and there you go. So you have your first line. Now what you're going to do is you're gonna go right beside, as close as you can to that, okay? And you're gonna pull through, and you're gonna go literally just one hole from the fabric lower. Like, you see how close I'm being? Okay, so you got one side in. You're gonna do the exact same thing on the other side. You're gonna go close as you can, push the needle through, and here you're now gonna go one underneath that, if that makes sense. So see? And that is what you're going to repeat until you have your full leaf. And that's a fishbone stitch. Again, so symmetry is important in leaves. Whatever you do to that side, you gotta do to the other side. This is what our fishbone leaf is gonna look like. I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing on here and do satin stitch for these, and I'll be right back. Okay, so now you see all the leaves are done. Our fishbone stitch is done. All of our stem stitch leaves are done. We're going to move over to these two flowers. We're going to start with this one. We're going to do a stitch you already know how to do, which is satin stitches. So similar to this flower, these leaves over here. Okay, so we're going to try to do that within, as much as we can within these lines. Okay, so as you can see, I finished these two flowers. I went ahead also and just did stem stitches on this flower here for the branches, and now we're going to work on these sort of circly flowers. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a knot called the French knot. You may have heard of this. So this first one is a little big one. So you're going to pull your thread through. I usually just hold the thread up with my needle, go around it 1, 2, 3 times, again, just depending on how big you want it to be. I put the needle in, I'm still holding on to the side of the thread with my finger, and from the bottom, I grab the needle and slowly start to pull it through while still holding on to this part here. And I slowly am gonna let it go. So I've picked this sort of off-white, light, very, very light beige color here, almost like a cream color actually. You can choose whatever color you like, and I'm gonna go ahead and do another one right there because I want it to be a little bit bigger. So again, you're holding it with one hand with the needle. You're going 1, 2, 3 times, or 2 times, or sometimes 1. But for this pattern, since it's a big one, we're trying to fill a bigger circle. We're gonna go 3. But if you're doing like little tiny knots on your pattern somewhere, you can always get away with even smaller ones. Okay, I'm gonna do one more. This is really up to your preference, by the way. Like, I'm just kind of seeing what looks kind of good in my head and trying that out. If it's not as good as it is in my head, that's okay too. Okay, so I'm just pulling this last one in. Okay, so I'm pretty satisfied with that. I like how that looks. So I'm gonna move on to the other one here. I'm gonna do these 3, and also just all along these little stems here as well, and I will come back with the final result. Okay, so here's the final piece. I am in love with it. I hope you like it too. I hope that you chose colors that you thought was going to be a good fit and not just the ones that I was doing, because honestly, I just put this together myself. I think I even want to recreate it with different colors. So I went ahead and I did the French knots on all of our last pieces, including the inside of our very first flower. I added these little almost like sparkling effects just to give the piece a little bit of color and creativity, and this is the final product. I hope you enjoyed this pattern. Check out my other ones if you did. I'm going to leave my Instagram handle on the screen so you can connect with me. Let me know if these videos on these purchases on the patterns are even helpful in order to get you started on your piece. And I hope to see you again soon in my next videos. Bye!